Good evening. We're so glad to have everybody with us. If you'll give us just a second as we get the last pieces put together, that would be really wonderful. LaShonda, I will share with you that Facebook is not allowing me to share to it. It says we don't have permission. I don't know what that's about. Very odd. Oh, hold on. If our participants can give us just a second, we've got a little bit of a technical glitch that I think we've got worked out. We're really grateful. We've got just a stunning panel today. I shared with them that during the prep sessions. This is just going to be a really amazing opportunity. And if you'll give me just a second here. I think the issue is I'm signed in on my account and not Appleseed's account. So LaShonda, do you let's kick things off. We'll get our panel going, and then I'll leave and come back in as Georgia Appleseed. But I know that we've got some caregivers at home, you know, parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles who are raising kids. We've got educators who are anxious to hear from our remarkable panelists. So why don't we start, and then I will deal with that particular technical issue. And just want to say, I'm Caroline Durham, the Legal and Policy Director for Georgia Appleseed. And we are so excited for this third in our three-part series on reopening schools. Times are of a time that no one anticipated it would be. And so tonight we're going to focus on recovering from the learning loss. There was learning loss as the pandemic hit last year and schools were shut down sooner. The transition to online learning, the impact around school discipline, and the way in which that has taken away some of the education support. Our teachers are working hard. We know school districts are working hard, and yet there's more to be done. And so our panelists tonight are going to really dive deep into these issues, give their expert insights, and really share with you some resources that are very important. So we're glad to be here tonight. I'm excited to turn it over to Sarah Babcock, the Deputy Director for the Truancy Intervention Project. We are jointly presenting this with the Truancy Intervention Project and the Georgia Coalition for Equity in Education, two organizations that are doing tremendous work in the community. And with that, Sarah, I'll turn it over to you to take it to the next level.
Great. Thank you, Caroline, for that introduction. And we're also so pleased to be with all of you tonight on this third and final webinar in our series this year on reopening schools and what all of us can do to have our kids be in the best possible position to be learning as we come into this, once again, unprecedented time. So as Caroline said, I am the Deputy Director of the Truancy Intervention Project, or TIP. TIP partners with the Fulton County Juvenile Court, Fulton County Schools, and Atlanta Public Schools to help children who are struggling with regular school attendance. And we do that through promoting good attendance habits and behaviors, and also offering interventions when attendance has reached a critical level. So I'm going to introduce our amazing panelists tonight. And then along with LaShonda Woods-Roberts, who is my co-moderator, we will get started. So first I'll introduce Leslie Lipson, who is a special education attorney. And I'm gonna let her go ahead and speak because she's kind of wearing two hats tonight. Not only is she on the panel, but also is here as a representative of the Georgia Coalition for Equity in Education.
Good evening. So my name is Leslie Lipson, and I'm very pleased to be here both as a panelist, because it's really an incredible panel. You're in for a treat tonight. For those of us who are into this stuff, we think this is a treat. And I'm also thrilled to be partnering with Georgia Appleseed and the TIP project through the Georgia Coalition for Equity in Education, which is a loose group of many different child-serving organizations imagining holistic advocacy for students that especially have multiple identities that intersect, that make it a lot less likely that they're going to get a quality education in Georgia public schools. So I'm going to drop a link if you want to be connected to that organization. I've been in practice in Georgia for about 20 years, and most of my work is on behalf of kids in school and public schools. So thank you.
Great, thank you. So I will briefly introduce each of our panelists, and then after some other introductory items, we're going to ask each of them to introduce themselves to you in more detail. So in addition to Leslie, we have Dr. Katika Lovett, who is the Assistant Superintendent at Atlanta Public Schools. Yuki Reis, who is a School-Based Behavioral Health Director at Viewpoint Health. And Dr. Nikki Sutton, who's the Program Manager for MTSS Implementation and Section 504 Coordinator at Muskogee County School District. And then, of course, last but absolutely not least, LaShonda Woods Roberts, who is staff attorney at Georgia Appleseed and my co-moderator tonight. And I'll turn it over to her now.
Good evening, everyone. So glad to be here with you. We wanted to just share some information really quick before we get into this great discussion. We at Georgia Appleseed partner with the Fulton County CSP, and those partnerships in part fund the activities and conversation that we're having tonight. And so we want to know who in Fulton County is joining us tonight. So if you did not get a chance to register through Zoom, or you're watching from Facebook, from either the tip page or the Georgia Appleseed page, we ask that you please email us your information so that we can make sure, number one, you get all of the resources that we're going to share out tonight, and let us know what your address is so that we can count you in as one of our Fulton resident partners. If you are willing to share your name and address, please send it to info@gaappleseed.org. It will mean a whole lot to us. It will be kept confidential. And we are so glad to have you here again tonight with us. And we want to keep this kind of programming going. Also, before we get into the conversation, we want to encourage each of you to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to post any questions, comments, concerns, or anything you have for the panelists so we can make sure we address it on tonight. We will reserve the last 15 minutes or so for a Q&A with you all in conversation. So please, please, please use that feature. We'll make sure we get those questions answered. And after the event is over, we do ask that you complete our post-webinar survey. While we have the link right here, we'll make sure we drop it in the chat. And if you did register through Zoom, it will pop up when we're done tonight. So we do ask that we hear back from you, because we want to make sure that whatever activities and events we're creating for the community are meaningful and relevant to what you want to know. So with that being said, I will hand it back over to my co-moderator, Sarah Babcock, and we're going to get this conversation started.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'll also mention, if you're joining us from Facebook, please feel free to drop any questions that you have for the panelists in the comments there. We are very fortunate to have TIP's legal extern from Georgia State University College of Law, Kate Rhodes, who is with us and will be monitoring everything happening on Facebook to make sure that your questions get to the panelists. So don't be afraid to use that feature. So now I think we would all love to hear a little bit more from each of our panelists about your background and role and the relevance that it brings to this conversation, and what you or your organization are doing to address and mitigate the learning loss or instructional loss, as we've also heard it called, that children are currently experiencing in the state. So I'm going to start with Dr. Lovett, if that's all right.
All right. Well, good evening, and thank you again for the invitation. So I am Katika Lovett. I serve as the Assistant Superintendent from the Office of Student Services here in Atlanta Public Schools. It is my pleasure to be here tonight to chat with you. I'll tell you a bit more about my background. I spent several years working in the field of special education. It is my first love and my passion. I also have served in the area of behavior supports, wraparound supports, as well as things like discipline and continued after school supports and summer programs, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go too deep into those. But in terms of what we're doing here in APS to mitigate instructional loss, we've put together an academic recovery model. And that model, the important thing about that model is that it lasts over a series of years. What we recognize is that to recover from learning loss is not just a drop in the bucket. So the district has committed to several different things for the next 3 years, one of them being a summer academic recovery academy, intervention blocks, and some wonderful universal screeners to really help us ascertain where our students are.
Wonderful. Dr. Sutton, would you go next?
Sure. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to join you all this evening to talk about what I'm really passionate about, which is helping all students be successful. I am Dr. Nikki Sutton. I'm the program manager for multi-tiered system of supports, and you do have a definition in the chat there if you're not able to see that. But what that means is that I've spent quite a bit of time really advocating for making sure that all students get exactly what they need to be successful. And that involves having to go through a series of steps to really ensure that students get exactly what they need when they need it, whether it's additional instructional support, remediation related, or if it's a student that needs advanced curriculum and needs just further support in that area. But my experience, I am from the state of Florida, and I have been doing this work in the state of Florida for, in Florida for 4 years. I've now moved to Georgia, been here for 3 years. And so continuing that work and just some things around the mitigation of the learning loss, what we're doing in Muskogee County School District, which is in Columbus, Georgia. We have actually implemented a summer learning experience for students, actually prior to the current school year, which was really successful. It was unlike any summer experience we've ever had. It integrated a lot of different components to make it feel like an experience for students, so that they had social and emotional learning support. So there was a piece there. There's also differentiated instruction. They had that camp-like experience. And so it really made it engaging. The other pieces that we put in place for Muskogee County is that we are also have an academic recovery plan, but have been successful at implementing academic and behavior screeners for the last several years. So we were very fortunate to kind of be ahead of the game there. And so teachers and staff are now more strategic in their approach with understanding what the needs are. And there are certainly quite a few needs after learning from what we learned in the last year and a half or two. And so tier 1 instruction looks a bit different for schools. And so they're supplementing as many resources as possible to ensure that we can capture, the needs of all students. SEL is required in our district. It was a mandate by our superintendent. So that's another component that's been really helpful as well, that has to be built in in each school's schedule. Master schedule has to have it in there. So those are just a few things. I won't hold us and allow others to kind of share, but thank you for allowing me to share with you today.
Thank you. And I'm sure we're going to get into all of that as the discussion tonight continues. Yuki Reis, would you introduce yourself next? Thank you.
Yes, good evening. My name is Yuki Reis, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I have been doing the child and adolescent mental health services for past 25 years. In past 6 years, my focus is on school-based mental health services. And actually, this is a program developed in a collaboration with the initiation of the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disability. And they reach out to each community service board, which is the public mental health agency statewide. So each school district should have access to this service. And my organization, Viewpoint Health, is a statewide organization, but my program the school-based mental health program in 3 counties, Rockdale, Newton, and Gwinnett County. And how it works is that we try to provide, all tier of services, tier 1 being the service for everybody. So we do, school-wide prevention, promotion of mental wellness, prevention of, suicide, prevention of all these behavioral, emotional issues. And tier 2, meaning that targeted intervention, early intervention and prevention. So we might reach out to, targeted like a group of students, maybe they're having issue with academics, social skills, anger management, we try to reach out before they develop diagnosable mental health issues. And the diagnosable mental health issues, we call it tier 3 services. That's when we provide the mental health services in the school building. Because one of the things that was preventing from a lot of kids to get the mental health service is that, parents have to pick up the kids from school, they're missing instruction time, parents missing work, and you can do it a couple of times. The ongoing was very difficult. But by us being at school, that's where the kids are. So, we took off the obstacles and trying to provide that tier, services. And this is year 6 that we are doing this. And during the pandemic, thank God for the technology that we were able to provide service virtually. But the service was mainly provided for those already identified students. So we were predicting that coming back, we're going to have to do a lot of outreach for all the students, as well as kids having difficulty because they, like you were saying, Sarah, that they have lost so many, right? They have lost family members, they may have lost economic status, they may have lost housing, whatever. So we were prepared to kind of, reach out to the students, trying to provide like a, light mental health services or preventative services. But then we realized that, oh my goodness, teachers are traumatized. Teachers were tired. Teachers needed so much help. So we did actually provided the teacher webinar at one of the school districts based on the request from the school system. And we're trying to reach out to everybody who's somehow experienced this, nationwide epidemic. And then also we realized a lot of family are, lacking food. So we did the food drive. It has nothing to do with mental health, but the Maslow's hierarchy, if you don't eat, you can't think about anything else. So we really trying to reach out to meet the need. And we are very lucky to, work with the school system because we are not an agency just pop in and out and do the mental health. That by program, we are to work with the school, and we really work closely with the school counselors, school social workers, school administrators to really find out what the needs are. And we're right there to, try to help school meet the need for the student to, regain that educational achievement.
Thank you. And Leslie, would you round us out, please?
Absolutely. Although I could listen to Yuki all day. I mean, when you start talking about, school-based and community-based mental health supports for everybody around, I mean, that is really just so important and so needed. So the Georgia Coalition for Equity in Education in the coming year, part of the work we're doing is really reaching out to families who are very, whereas a lot of teachers don't have enough professional services, there are some. And for families, even though there are, I think, are many districts that are really trying to provide some parent training, there is something very different about having an independent organization and assistance around helping parents figure out what's possible for their kids, how to get ahead of problems that may be coming this way. And so we're working with individual parents and kind of parent and family serving organizations to help people think about how many days of instruction might your kids miss this coming year because of quarantining and or the entire district or your school shutting down. How many days of instruction for a kid with disabilities would make, hit the threshold for you to make a formal request. For other particular types of issues around child fine and long COVID, we're looking at these numbers as they're coming down the pike, thinking that 6 to 8% of kids who experience COVID will have long COVID. US OSEP just set out a good memo around child fine practices for kids with long COVID, and parents don't really, they know about COVID fog, but they don't know that that might be a way to actually help kids access services. So if you're listening to this and you're interested in partnering with us to reach families and young people interested in advocacy, that's something we're very interested in. We're also trying to bring out information that's not readily available. And so we have a series of trainings going on this year called Impact Over Intent, focusing on particular issues that affect kids that are LGBTQIA, information about how colonialism impacts education and racism and school to prison pipeline issues. And so some of the issues that are maybe a little more forward facing within educational advocacy. Thanks.
Thank you all so much for all of that information. And I think before we jump to the next question, we have a question from the audience. And I'm gonna pitch this to Dr. Sutton, Yuki, and Dr. Lovett. They asked, Tier 2 provides targeted screenings and Tier 3 provides those behavior assessments. They want to know what are the differences between those two tiers and who decides who falls on Tier 2 versus Tier 3.
Okay, as it relates to Tier 2 support, generally speaking, schools or school districts will implement a screening process. And then along with that, there are some criteria that are used to determine what student supports are needed. So for students who, along with screening, there's also a review of additional data sources to determine that based on the information at hand, is a student that needs additional, more targeted support, meaning that there is certainly evidence that students fall below grade level proficiency or below expectations if we're looking at behavior, and there's a need for additional sort of supplemental targeted intervention, usually delivered in a small group fashion. When you're looking at Tier 3, you're looking at something more intensive, whether that's, and that could be academics or behavior related supports. And so, Tier 3 is not necessarily just targeted to behavior, but again, there usually are some criteria or decision rules that will help. And those are generated based on, number of pieces of evidence of the student work, assessment data, screening data. Again, you want to use a variety of sources. Schools are using a variety of sources to determine whether there's some consistency across those data sources to determine that if that's the actual need for the student or not. And usually in those cases, it's more intensified, meaning that students are showing significantly below level proficiency or progress, and they need more intensive support, meaning needing some remediation or an adjustment in the level of instruction that they're receiving more frequently throughout a week's time, for example. So the decision generally rests on those decision rules that are generated, and a lot of those assessment measures are generally the things that we can use to establish whether students are below grade level, above grade level, on grade level, and where in anywhere on that spectrum. And then teachers will involve parents in that process, or at least inform parents of how, what that process looks like, and how they will support, the needs of students in those relevant areas.
LaShonda, we need you to come off mute.
And I'm just rolling. Thank you, Dr. Sutton. I was asking if Dr. Lovett or Yuki wanted to add to that. It was very detailed and informative. So y'all are good with that? Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Sutton, for leading that.
Thank you.
So just thinking about the focus, of course, at school, a lot of folks have been really, really focused on the instructional loss, but there have been so many other forms of loss during this time, including the loss of loved ones, the loss of housing, food, all types of security, just like Yuki just spoke to the food security measures that Viewpoint is pushing through with some of their clients. What is your district, or what are you hearing that's happening to try to help these students as well as their families? What are some of the school districts doing in partnership with maybe other organizations or as an agency? What are they doing to try to curb some of the impact of those other forms of losses throughout the state?
Okay, I'll jump in here. One of the things that we really focused on is whole child supports. And I know that's kind of cliche. A lot of people hear whole child and they think it's kind of this fuzzy, lovely word, but basically it really means looking at what are the true needs that are impacting a child's ability to function, to learn, to show up every day in their educational environment. One of the ways in which we do that is looking at what are those traumas that are in place. You mentioned some things that are traumatic experiences, whether that's the loss of a loved one, food insecurity, or housing, or just all of those things that in fact are traumatic experiences for children. We take that information, we do some assessment so that we can really understand what does a child need. And then we do something called wraparound supports. Wraparound supports are things like counseling, getting our social workers involved, even referring them out for mental health providers. One of the things that we're very proud of in Atlanta Public Schools is that we have behavior and mental health support in every single school. We work with partners throughout the city of Atlanta to bring that into our schools. And some of our schools even have clinicians who are housed there in the school every single day. So really looking at how to address all of those kind of, all the things that you mentioned is really a whole child supports approach, looking at how we can really wrap our arms around what are the child's true needs, making sure that we're not focused on some of those exterior kind of displays of need, which might look like a behavior and some discipline things, but really taking the time to understand what a child needs, wrap our arms around them, do those wraparound supports, and really enforce some true trauma-informed care, trauma-informed training, trauma-informed practices as we're working with our children and families.
Anyone can jump in on that question if you wanted to talk about some of the things you're seeing to help curb some of those other losses and challenges.
So, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Yuki.
So I just wanted to add what Dr. Lovett said, that, like I said, this school-based mental health service, started 5-6 years ago with the collaboration with the Department of Behavioral Health. But this year, both Newton County and Gwinnett County school system decided to, put aside some funding that to like expand the services to more students and more schools. So they are providing us with the financial so that we can expand services. And I think that's their, like Dr. Lovett said, their like an effort of increasing the access to mental health services. And just briefly, like a people health, it's not just a CNA. We serve adults with all different level of services. So we are, we are seeing, because of the care money, all this funding is there, and we are trying to kind of link the client to, whatever the funding was available in the community, so that, this COVID-related funding is utilized in most needed population.
Part of what I'm really hearing from families, and we're really seeing, is that people are deeply exhausted. And if we're in a marathon, we aren't even to the halfway point yet. And so I think people keep on thinking that things are going to return back to some imaginary normal, and that they really don't have to get their hands around possibly distance learning, or making sure that kids are compliant with certain types of mitigation efforts, or that they can just wait it out, and that the mental health issues that people are experiencing are just going to be alleviated as the COVID numbers, God willing, decrease. But what we're really encouraging people to do is to face this head on, to adapt and to learn the advocacy skills, and to be creative and nimble, because it's not a short burst. We started in year 1 of education. We thought that was year 1. And we thought maybe by, I think what we'll say, by Easter, we might be back. And here we are. We are in our 3rd year of COVID-19 educational disruptions. I've been calling it the Delta flavor, year 3. And I'm really encouraging people to to put their best effort forth, that this is just not going to go away soon. And all the innovations and interventions that people are coming up with during this time, these creative mindsets and models and different methods, they will serve us so well for so long to come in the future. And that we can hold close.
Leslie, that is a perfect segue into our next question, which is recognizing that we are in year 3 of educational disruption caused by the pandemic, and we don't know what is ahead, but certainly in this year, we anticipate that there's going to be, that the new normal is going to have closures and quarantines, and if not schools being in isolation, then certainly maybe classes having to be isolated. And that there's going to be some shifts back and forth between in-person learning and virtual learning. And so recognizing that that is probably the new normal for a period of time. Is there anything that you all see your communities doing or would recommend that folks can do to take some proactive measures to get ahead of that? I feel like we've all spent so much of this time playing catch up. What can educators and caregivers, parents and community partners be doing to try to proactively get ahead of some of these things that we know are likely to be coming?
I think one of the things that we can do is just embrace it. You know, we've talked about the pandemic and just so many things that have come out of it, but one of the things that we often say is using the pandemic as an opportunity for innovation. You know, thinking about what Leslie just shared, you know, the innovation will serve us well. If we can think back to some of the things that we've had to do, the pivot, the swift pivot, if you will, to virtual learning that we all made. We never thought we could, you know, lift a whole school district and go virtual, or have so many children learning from home, you know, those types of things that we had to take on and we had to embrace. I think that's the biggest thing that we can do, is be open to it and understand that it's coming, that what was normal may not ever be again. Now we know we can do school virtually. Now we know that we can teach from home, or there are individuals who can work remotely in our school districts. Being willing to just embrace that new normal and, you know, give it a shot, knowing that we have done it successfully over this past time.
Any other thoughts on that? I think it looks like we've lost Dr. Sutton. We're hoping that she's able to rejoin.
I am here. I just can't. I apologize. I think I need my video enabled. I think it says because a host has stopped it. I'm not sure.
I can fix that.
Thank you.
Did anyone else want to weigh in on thoughts about proactive measures to be taking as we're thinking about the new normal?
Try it now, Dr. Sutton.
Okay. All right. So we're talking about, and I apologize, we're talking about proactive measures for just mitigating some of the learning loss and addressing those needs.
Recognizing that there's going to be shifts between in-person and virtual learning probably for the foreseeable future for a lot of communities.
Okay. And I will add to whatever has been said, and I'll do my best to try to connect the dots. I know some things that have been successful. I mean, we've learned a lot this first go around, and now we're kind of in the second wave. You know, it's definitely helpful to make sure that, you know, the partnership between, you know, schools, communities, parents are in place. And, you know, the resources that are available are many. I know that there are schools and districts that are taking on extra projects just to support families, children and families at home. They have created clothing closets and have been collecting additional pieces of articles of clothing to help support, you know, in whatever way they can. But most importantly, there's access to, you know, MiFis or Wi-Fi devices to ensure that there's access to those instructional materials. And then some districts have even gone to sort of one-to-one learning and have purchased, computers for all students. So that personalized learning, has been really helpful, I think, and, trying to make sure that the connection is there. But, teachers have gone the extra mile, even phone calls, making sure that they are staying in touch with students, even when they may have a difficult time connecting to that virtual instruction. So finding other ways and other avenues to remain in contact, and just try as much as possible to work with parents, and utilizing some of those strategies as much as possible at home. I would say those are just a few things that I can think of at the moment that are really helpful and can be impactful for some.
I want to revisit, if it's okay, something that Yuki spoke to earlier about getting into the communities and making sure those folks who need help the most are getting it. I think it's safe to say everyone in America and throughout the world has dealt with some form of trauma, whether it be collective, whether it be chronic. There's been some trauma in the last year and a half. So what are school districts doing to help really protect mental wellness and wellness in general, not only for the students, but also for staff members, teachers, family members? What are some of the things you're seeing, and what are you doing in your district, and how is it reaching those folks who just will not be at the school door, but they impact the kids at the school? And Yuki, if you can start us off on that one, and then anyone chime in afterwards, please.
So are we on the resource that we talked about?
Yeah, so whatever type of mental health resources are out there, just wellness for teachers, kids, family members, what are we seeing, and what can folks look to?
So I'm going to send it to you for you to later distribution, but there are some organizations that are providing like a support. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these organizations, but Parent to Parent Georgia, Georgia Parent Support Network, NAMI Georgia, mental health organizations, they all have a support group, and the support groups are specialized. Like for example, if you go to a parent support network, they have resource guide and resource particularly for if you have a child who is some sort of disability, or including like autism or special education. What can you do? What can you do to advocate? That kind of information, as well as virtual parent support groups, and some support groups are more toward educational. So they're going to have a speaker and they talk about how to advocate for your child, how to reach out to the school. That kind of information is also there. I think that what I hear from the community is that the need for mental health support is highest ever, but there is a shortage of the therapist. A therapist is like a busiest, especially because we can provide service virtually. That's great, that open door to so many people, but we don't have enough therapists anywhere. So you are on the waiting list. You reach out, you go to your insurance, and then they tell you these are the therapists that you can see, and everybody's like, I'm not taking a new client. So really needs are high and resources are low. So I think that's when all these organizations come in and like try to at least give you something, that you may not get the therapy, but at least you can talk to peer about how to kind of self-care and all that. So I think that effort in the community is really important right now.
Can I just share what I've learned from you, Yuki, and Chad Jones from Viewpoint about training up school staff to provide those universal supports to free up some of the clinicians for the more intense needs of the students. And I just think that's amazing work. Anyone else from the panel want to speak to what's being done to preserve wellness in this time?
I know that in Muskogee County, our human resources department has been phenomenal with just expanding mental health, services. So we use the Pastoral Institute, and the number of sessions that are available to staff have increased. There's also, we have started our school-based mental health services. So we have school-based health, sites. And so we have one school that we've started with where there are individuals that are on site from a mental health agency that come in and provide services directly to students. And so that's expanding as we go along. And we do have memorandums of understanding with external agencies. And so a lot of those, and Yuki's right. I mean, the need is high, and the just the trying to find all of those clinicians and people to help is really tough. So I know they're stretched thin, but we were able to have a ongoing relationship with a couple of agencies who've reached out and want to continue the supports to our students. And LaShawna, you're right in terms of trying to build capacity among teachers to provide some of those universal supports is key. Those social emotional learning curriculums that are available at schools and within school districts are really helpful for those kinds of things. So, programs like Second Step and that are evidence-based programs are really, really helpful. And that's just one example. There's also there's another program called Connect with Kids that's computer-based. It's mostly for students who are at the secondary level, middle and high school students. But again, just key resources that can be very helpful to students. In terms of just addressing trauma and sort of more intensive needs, I mean, that's where we're really trying to rely on some of those supports through our mental health experts that are coming into the building for that. But we found that very, very helpful in trying to support our students who do, have those needs and have experienced some loss.
I'll also just quickly add ditto to everything that both Dr. Sutton and Yuki have shared. In addition to the work with students, what we found is that a lot of our staff have been in tremendous need of mental health supports. Probably more so than ever before in the district. You start to see things like people taking extended leave or FMLA. You really start to see it show up in things like that. So we've invested in mental health clinicians for the district so that we actually have them on site, on staff, who simply serve adults. So in addition to what we're doing for students, just having people who our adults can actually see and connect with. We have had, unfortunately, in our district, we've had situations where we've lost employees to COVID, and the trauma that's associated with that, being able to help other staff persons process that type of trauma in addition to what they're already dealing with. But, we often say that saying that you can't pour from an empty cup. We want to make sure that our staff members feel full and that they are ready to pour back into our students in a positive way. So we've really, in addition to all of the student stuff that was shared, we've also done a lot of, supports for our employees and really tried to just undergird what we're doing to make sure they feel supported as well.
Thank you. One thing we're working with parents and other stakeholders is to understand some of the funding that's been flowing down from the federal government. And there've been three big pots, ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. And ESSER 3 is about $4.2 billion that's gone to the state that's then been passed through to individual districts. And basically, every single district has submitted a plan. It's called the American Rescue Plan. It's their LEA application that is funding, I think, some of the incredible innovations that my colleagues have referred to. And I think really gives people the opportunity to innovate. But number one, we actually played around with some advocates I was working with yesterday, with advocates from maybe 20 different counties, and they all tried to find their ESSER plan. And it's supposed to be very transparent, but especially for some districts that maybe don't have such a big IT department, it's hard to find. So one thing we're encouraging families to do is to go look at this ESSER plan. See, take a look at what services that the schools are going to be offering, and advocate for your kid to get into some of these services. Because, you know, I love to hear Yuki talk about this. It's in 3 counties. It's in 3 districts. Other districts have things going on, but we might not know about them. And so, you know, we want families to, you know, stakeholders to know school's got a lot going on. They're doing public health and education, hard to also do all the PR. So families can you know, get really familiar with the Google and try to find this information and then make the request to the school. People always say, can I ask the school for this? I always say, you can ask. Maybe they can say yes, maybe they can say no, maybe you get in the pipeline, maybe you're waving the flag, maybe they say no to what you asked, they have something to offer that'll be a better fit. But surely we should be asking. And parents are not aware of the pretty impressive investment the federal government is making into local school systems, and that in Georgia, it's local control. And districts really got to sit down and decided what holes are they trying to plug up right now. And it's probably not enough, but it's definitely the largest investment I've seen in my career.
Great, thank you. So on a somewhat related note, you know, not only have we all over the past 18 months experienced the COVID pandemic, but there's also been, as many folks have said, sort of these dual pandemics, right? Because last year, we saw sort of the racial justice and social justice reckoning that was sparked by the murder of George Floyd, along with the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, both of those pandemics have disproportionately impacted low income and Black and Hispanic communities. And so recognizing that that's going to create some complex and interrelated trauma in those populations and for those students, what are some things that educators can be doing to prepare for that in the classroom? And then also, Leslie, you know, if parents are concerned, gosh, my kid has been really impacted by this, what are some things that parents might be able to do to advocate for their child if that is impeding, you know, the way that they're showing up in the classroom and their ability to get their education?
So I think I would say that, God willing, and I know that every student and every teacher and every staff person in the United States of America has been deeply impacted by racism and systemic racism within our public schools and every infrastructure that's a part of our country. And so I think the idea that it is being discussed and talked about and acknowledged, not just on the people being oppressed, but also for the people that everybody, we all interact with the system, and that people are taking personal responsibility and collective responsibility and looking not only at individual action, but at the system. I think we can encourage that at home. I think we can continue fighting against policies and systems. I think people are really comfortable calling out individual acts of racism, and a lot not really comfortable. Different challenges, but a lot of challenges also in looking at systems and coming at them for things that we think make sense because we've seen it for a really long time, but they're really, really, really racist action. Even our language, disproportionality, what do we mean? We want to be proportionate. We're going for proportionate. It really pushes hard against reparations or against any idea of justice. So, I mean, I think we have to think about our language and our framing, and families really are able to do that. And I think, you know, we're raising a whole generation of kids up that see a lot more than I wish I had seen when I was younger.
So I'm not too familiar with what school are planning. A lot of things I see, but like with my agency, when that was happening, our agency had like an agency-wide committee meeting, and we created this committee to address the, injustice, racial injustice, and all that. But when we were talking about it, I think what Leslie was saying too, like it was just kind of highlighted the existing injustice in a different light, right? So the number of the kids who are receiving the special ed, is it really like fairly distributed among the race, or is it something to, reflecting some sort of racism or some sort of prejudice? And it was highlighted because the virtual learning is so hard for all the students, but especially for certain, students with certain disability. It is super hard for the students to learn, for teachers to teach. It was hard, right? And then also that, I don't know that like even if when the school was providing the Wi-Fi and the computer, I had a family who had 5 kids working on one Wi-Fi. It just did not work because, and then sometimes, the student had to share the laptop, and some kids, because they didn't have the laptop, they were learning on, cell phone. And that all contributed to the the educational loss, right? Because yes, it was available to everybody, but it was not equally available. So now that coming back, I don't know what we can do, but I guess like Leslie was saying, like really 101, individually, what is it that you experienced hardship? It really doesn't matter the cause of the hardship. Is it the racism? Is this the, the economic difference? Whatever that is, we really have to like reach out and listen and kind of try to solve the problem from their perspective. That looking at the things from the macro level, like a social injustice is one thing, but also we can't not forget that each individual experiences things in a different way.
I'll just quickly add to what Yuki said, thinking about it from the school perspective, one of the things that we can do thinking about the dual pandemics is, I think about social emotional learning, and like never before, social emotional learning is so critically important. Having our students know that they have a voice that matters, they're heard, we want to hear them, and their trauma and their experiences does matter, and whether that is, they have felt marginalized because of their race, or whether they have felt, an outsider because they couldn't connect, to school through the virtual environment. Whatever the case may be, I think it's critically important that social emotional learning is at the forefront of what we do. One of the things that we also did in our district was healing circles. We really worked with students and just giving them an opportunity, some of our older students, really giving them an opportunity to share how they felt. When you think about the dual pandemics, in particular the racial injustice, movement, so many students felt an anger on the inside that they simply couldn't express. And we didn't want that to show up like discipline issues, or show up like I'm being defiant, or, insubordinate, or whatever those other things that lead to out of school suspension and other discipline issues. We wanted them to be able to safely express how they felt. And so being able to work with our SEL staff, we were able to implement something called healing circles. And that was really, really powerful for our students, for them to know that they have a voice, their voice matters. We want to support them as they process all of these complex things that they're feeling. We feel it as an adult. It feels complex to me as an adult, So really helping them to just process those things was something that we did and found to be really powerful for many students.
I'm going to also add to that in terms of on the adult side and looking at the community partners and parents, but look at policies, look at, policies within school districts. I mean, that's important. Look at your student handbooks and look and review that from cover to cover, or, other handbooks that the districts, create and see, are there things in there that we could actually change and revise and maybe, improve, because it may point to some concerns with, fairness, or, or looking at issues that might be become apparent because of, students and in their cultural differences? Are there things that could be, pointing to that? And I think that, all school districts can do certainly a better job of that, making sure that there's language and information that's included, so that, all parents really understand and it's culturally responsive to those families and cultures. And so, I think that's another big piece that we often probably miss, or we feel that maybe only certain individuals can have a stake in. And as community partners and as parents, you certainly have a stake in that as well. And, and can speak up about those things if there are concerns. I know for my school district, I sit on the committee that revises our student handbook every year. And we actually do invite parents and community, individuals to come in to be a part of that process, and we found it very helpful, because there are things that we may miss that, our folks in the community may say, hey, we need to revisit this piece, or what does this mean? Or can you help us clarify that? So I think that's another important piece too, in terms of just addressing some of the concerns that we've had, and that might be, very that are aligned to some of the issues that we've had with the dual pandemics.
And that's just so important, thinking about those discriminatory impacts that happen, because a lot of times those policies and handbooks that are written, they might not prioritize inviting folks with disabilities to the table, but yet they're one of the most punished groups. They might not prioritize inviting diverse student groups and parent groups to the table, yet they're some of the most punished groups. So to that point, and Leslie, I want to lift up what you said about the word disproportionality, because it's in my question. And vocabulary is important. Calling attention to the impact of words is important. And I just had never thought about the flip side of disproportionality. So thank you for that. But for the sake of this question.
It is the most fake sanitized word. I mean, every time I hear it, I cringe. I'm sorry.
Well, give me a pardon on this cringe, because it's going to be framed
doing it
tonight,
again?
but help us with that, right? So as we think about how bad and how extraordinarily disproportionate punishment is, as it relates to criminal justice, as it relates to juvenile justice, as it relates to school discipline, we know that a lot of those same groups who are experiencing high level of exclusionary discipline, suspensions and expulsions, are the same ones who are pretty much impacted by the pandemic in some of the most severe ways, right? And so some of these kids will show up and get in trouble when they return in person, because they have not dealt with that complex trauma, and it's just packed down tight. And from what we understand across the state, no matter the makeup, rural, urban, suburban, kids are fighting. Kids are going at it. And it's like this cathartic release that has not been dealt with. So how can school districts, knowing that these kids, a lot of them are coming back with complex trauma, some of them intersectional trauma, what can they do to try to prevent punishing these kids for just showing up as humans? What are your districts doing to safeguard against excluding these kids from their education under these circumstances? And what are you hearing in the community as well?
I will want to start with this one. I know that in our district, we're doing a lot more on the restorative practices side. We actually have an individual and we have teachers that are being trained, leaders that are being trained on those practices. And that's been really helpful. It's not necessarily in every single yet, but that's something that we're expanding along the way. The other thing is that I think that we have actually done a good job of expanding like our youth mental health first aid trainings, and making sure that as our new staff come in, they're getting the necessary, basic tools to recognize when there might be some mental health concerns happening, and really learning sort of those tier 1 types of practices to help address those needs with students right away. Another piece is, just continuing to be understanding, be empathetic. I think, a lot of our teachers, they too have experienced loss. They too have experienced just a lot in their own families. And so they're very empathetic, towards students and really working to partner with parents and, really find out what are their needs right now. Because sometimes the kids can't even learn. Like, this learning is secondary because they have so many other needs that they're trying to address. And so we have a wonderful and awesome school counseling, social and school social work departments. The two of them, they are really pouring in a lot of supports and really kind of bringing in a lot of the community resources that are available, and really trying to provide that to students and families as well. And again, not necessarily related to education per se, but they offer resources in school, and school counselors are doing groups, mental health groups that they're doing grief groups. So a lot of that has increased over time, especially in this past year. And then the other part of that is on the academic side. We do have a lot of computer-based programs that are available. So a lot of supplemental programs that have been really useful for students. Parents have phoned in and called around just asking for what else can we do to help our students. They're so far behind, or, a lot of them are actually, unfortunately thinking that a lot of their students are, needing special supports. And I said, well, let's try to work to see if they definitely are in need of those supports, because there are supports available in the general education setting. And so we just make them aware of those supports and those materials that are available, and then really work with schools to try to make sure that they are communicating and sharing that information with parents holistically. So as an example, some of our schools have actually had a parent-teacher conference night or open house, and they have been sharing with parents, a lot of the instructional opportunities, because they certainly have come and asked those questions like, what are we going to do? And they're so far behind, and they've lost a lot of school. They weren't as engaged on the computer as they were, face to face with a teacher. And so, our district has been really helpful in terms of using opportunities to provide, those little, Wi-Fi or MiFi, kind of devices. They continue to keep those handy. And then also there have been lots and lots, and parents have been inundated with lots of resources for online, programs and games and things that are more educational related to help keep their children engaged. Because still there's still some that are potentially working, in a virtual environment due to some medical, because they're considered medically fragile, or they have some other needs. But then a majority of them are in school and are looking for things to help support them at home. So those are just a few things that, that's happening in our district in Muskogee.
Anybody else want to speak to some of the ways we can mitigate? I see you.
Yes, I think we keep saying that educating the teachers and provide the support to the teachers is so important, because it was just this week happened, one of the school that our mental health clinician has been working with the school, and most of the teachers have been through the mental health first aid and all that. So the school is very understanding, principal is very understanding. And we had one of the student had major meltdown that required multiple school staff, involved. And this was the first time this student had this meltdown. And we found out that in the classroom, his teacher, I guess she somehow used some strong language and probably raised voice a little bit, but he responded and then later on the clinician found out that he just said that reminded him of the time when his daddy was, like yelling at his mom. So he was like a trauma that was triggered. The trauma just came out. It was not a good thing, but it was very helpful to find that out. And it was very helpful that, principal was able to understand what clinician was trying to say. He wasn't acting up. He was just, reacting to the trigger that was stemming from the house. So, but if we didn't have that relationship, we didn't have that, ongoing education, the principal might have acted completely differently. So, providing that support to the teachers in the school is really important to, kind of deal with all these things that's going to keep happening.
I think that story is particularly powerful, and that teachers and educators in that particular scenario had discretion over the progressive discipline policy. And one thing when we think about policies and procedures is very really harsh, very punitive types of disciplinary policies that are implemented in such a way where kids that are LGBTQIA, kids of color, Black kids, kids with disabilities, and especially kids that have all of these different things, kids living in poverty, kids speaking English as a second language. We could go, if we said in the chat, please drop your favorite group that you think and is getting the short end of the stick. We'd have a really long chat going on, because it would be endless. And the other thing that's wild about that is it's predictable. So part of the issue around this is that we know, for example, a good example of a policy that's predictably after those groups would be dress codes. Kids with sensory issues, kids that are much more well-developed than other kids get, trashed on dress codes. Dress codes have a lot of cultural bias. They're expensive. I mean, there are all these different pieces, and we understand that dress codes are a universal way to elevate the dominant cultural norms of professionalism, and that's how we do it, starting in schools. And we might all disagree on what the appropriate dress code may be, but most people who are pretty into looking critically at what has been happening, at least the implementation of them, they're problematic. Also for kids who are transgender, I mean, they're problematic across the board. And then I think that the more we can encourage people to look at that and give schools discretion over making the choices around that. We have a lot of, there are a lot of lawyers on this call, but there are a lot of laws that take control away from districts to make decisions. Additionally, if we were speaking truth about things, we would say criminalization of disability-related behavior through bouncing kids out, through any kind of due process procedures by referring disability-related behavior to the court system. When I say disability-related behavior, I mean behavior within the IEP and BIP, within the special education program. This kid is disabled because of this behavior, and that is the very behavior that assists the child into the juvenile court system, and nonviolent behavior. So I think the other thing we can also do is to really speak truth about this stuff. I never call out of school suspension and in-school suspension. I never call them that. I was calling punishment by loss of instruction, punishment by exclusion from the classroom. And Lord knows, after the past year and a half, we do not need more exclusion from our classrooms. So I think this is just an incredible opportunity for people to be re-examining it. I'm so heartened to hear about schools sitting down, Dr. Sutton, every year and walking through it with our favorite red pens. It is just really exciting. These changes are coming.
Thank you all. I wanted to lift up something in the chat that was noted that I'm hoping maybe Yuki and some others can speak to. And that is, somebody noted, I'm worried that nurses and teachers at our school are pushing too much that the kids might have COVID. So it seems like, and then making the kids worry too much as children, right? So sounds like maybe there's some concerns about anxiety from the adults, that then of course, if the adults are having anxiety, that's going to translate to the kids. So any suggestions from you all about, sort of what educators can be doing, and maybe also if there's any parents or caregivers on the call who also are feeling anxiety, what can sort of be done to help help the parents manage the anxiety or help the adults manage the anxiety so that it doesn't end up translating into the kids taking that on.
I'll jump in really quickly here. So I think a couple things. One, with helping the adults manage the anxiety is something that I mentioned a moment ago. We've all experienced this trauma together. So that anxiety is very real for all of us. And I think just acknowledging that first and then getting those adults the help that they need. I mentioned that one of the things that we're doing is getting more clinicians who are boots on the ground to help with teachers and other people in processing many of these things that they're feeling, their very own anxieties. There are many people who feel that school is not a safe place right now because COVID is very real and very present. So really helping people to, process that feeling is one thing. I think the other piece for from a teacher to kind of kid perspective is do what teachers do what we do, which is educate, right? Let's make sure that we take the time to really just teach our kids about it so they fully understand. They understand, why do I have to wear a mask? Well, this is what that kind of means. Doing things like social stories about it, helping them to see it from different angles. I think that's how we kind of break down that bit of anxiety. It is a very real, present part of our lives now. And so the more that we can teach it, the more we can talk about it and not keep it kind of as this hidden thing and you got COVID and you got to go, but really helping them understand this is a part of life. This is where we are. Unfortunately, this is the space that we're living in. It's the water that we're all drinking. And so let's make sure that we're teaching our students at this time is what I suggest.
Great, thank you. And so I do want to turn to one group of students that have been particularly challenged by the loss of in-person learning and in-person instructional supports. And that is, as we've kind of alluded to, students with disabilities or students who have special education needs, students who maybe are in that tier 3 or have 504 plans or IEPs. The loss of in-person instruction for many of them was very challenging. And so as those students are returning potentially to in-person instruction, what are some things that schools are doing to help bridge that gap? And then also from the parent perspective, if parents are concerned about, here's what we've lost, how are we going to get this back? What are some things that they can be doing to advocate for their children?
Okay, I guess I'll take that one too. First, I'll start us off. But from the special education perspective, anytime that we're removing our students with disabilities from learning, we have to kind of replace that, right? And so one of the things that we did in our district was creating a series of compensatory services that parents could take advantage of, giving them an opportunity for additional things like tutorials, additional engagement with the teacher, having our summer programs be something that we really encourage our students with disabilities to participate in. Those are the kind of things that we've done in the district. I will tell you though, from just a personal perspective and being a practitioner and advocate first, it's simply not enough. What I say to parents is that, we have to work together on this. And so, as you've experienced this with your child, parents have been teachers in many regards for over a year. As you've lived through that and experienced that, let's work together in creating a plan. Maybe the offering that we had for compensatory services or the tutorial, maybe that was enough, maybe it wasn't. But let's work together to get a more intensive plan in place for your child. And that's really the piece that I encourage parents to do, and school districts, the same way. School districts, I encourage our district to do that. Let's work hand in hand with our parents to get more supports in place, more opportunities for engagement with teachers, more opportunities with related service providers, all those things that our students with disabilities missed, and many of those students for whom they were already behind. So we can't really make up the time, but we can add on, we can supplement, we can give them more, continue to work together to get more in place for them, is what I would suggest.
And I'll add to Dr. Lovett's comments. I mean, compensatory services are definitely very helpful. That's something that we've also done in Muskogee County School District. In addition to, now moving forward, these summer learning experiences are going to be a part of what we do now. We know that there's going to be a residual effect that's going to take a few years for us to kind of recover from this. And so we don't take that lightly, and we're going to do what we need to do to be proactive and take proactive measures. Something else that's really key is ensuring that we have screening measures in place and ways to monitor progress along the way. Just because we know that, this loss has happened, but as we start to recover and even surpass, hopefully, where we were, we want to know that, what we're doing is working. And so it's really key that, especially from not just from an academic perspective, but also from a behavioral perspective. And that's a little scary for parents sometimes, to allow for a behavioral screening because that might yield or, result in some information that might be, parents consider like private, or, we don't talk about that outside the house. But, these measures are completely grounded in research. They have certain evidence that has been really helpful in identifying the needs of students very early. And so we want to continue to be proactive in that fashion, and encourage you to continue to allow, your children to be a part of that process. As it relates to students in special education, certainly reviewing plans, those plans to see, are there adjustments that need to be made? Do we need to add other services that may not have been a need for that student at the time, but maybe these additional needs have come to surface. And so do we need to make those adjustments when we do those, reviews on a regular basis? And so, again, just connecting students from that virtual world back into the in-person world. I think giving them grace, they have to learn those rituals and routines again from, just from a behavioral standpoint, and just learning, okay, well, what I forgot, what do we do for when we get into, Miss Jones's class, or, what are our routines? And so that takes time to rebuild. It's almost like starting over again, right? So we have to be just patient, I think, and then be flexible in terms of helping students adjust, because it is going to be an adjustment period. And the more that we can support them by giving them some, advance notice or organizers, things that help structure their lives and at school again, the better that transition is going to be. And so, again, I think those are just some things that I think will help students as they transition back into school to get more comfortable in that environment again. And then, not really think about, the pandemic per se, but really focus in on their academic success and their work. And then also, the teachers helping when they're having some struggles, really helping with, those classroom-wide, supports, and taking a minute to do some mindfulness or doing some deep breathing and things like that can be really helpful. And then there's research, that supports that. That's been, an effective way to help calm, even some of the most, intensive, moments when students are having a hard time. So.
So the law is just so flawed, right? The idea that we could compensate, any person who kind of just even went through what we've gone through, up until the Delta flavor, that is what the law is. But it really, we're all kind of wink, wink, nod, nod, compensatory education. Do we tell parents to ask for it? Absolutely. Do I tell parents, let's be careful? I keep on using this analogy to people. And I say, I tell you what, I'm going to gift you a personal trainer that will work with you 50 hours a week on weightlifting for the next month. It's free. Do you want to do it? And they're like, heck no, because it's hard. Compensatory education, individualized tutoring, intensive tutoring, therapy, Yuki, all of these things, they are really hard. And I don't know about y'all, but as I have changed my work schedule as time has gone on, I've had different levels of endurance. And so I think we have to be really careful about allocating school resources and what kids actually have the ability to digest at any given time, still living within this culture. And not all education skills are equal, right? I mean, reading, let's be clear, you can't read well, then you're gonna have a lot of trouble even understand, social studies and math. Everything is gonna be hard if you're not, the whole 3rd grade benchmark in reading. Those would be skills that you're really going for compensatory. Or intensive services, or like however you want to frame it, right? Is it summer? Is it tutoring? Is it compensatory services? Is it more small groups classes? I don't really care what schools call it at all. But I do think parents should be asking for it. I think they should be really careful about the timing, because it's weird. Like, so if we ask for compensatory services now, and then the next year your kid misses 45 days because of quarantines and COVID and blah, blah, all of the different things. Then you do another round of like, what is that? And nobody knows, right? None of us know like how that comes out. But I think part of it is what we're also talking about, that whole child thing. Like, what can a kid digest? And when it doesn't work, who often gets blamed? We often don't think about instructional failure or poor use of frequency and duration and of intensity. It's oftentimes, well, the kid wasn't, was resistant, wasn't into it. They didn't show up. The parent didn't bring, all the different things. So the other piece is we want to set people up for success in a lot of different ways and keep that good relationship going. So I think this whole patience and grace piece that Dr. Sutton mentioned, and I know I think we've all talked about that on for everybody involved. And I think that the disability community, much like the community at large, is very divided on mitigation practices. I think I said that very diplomatically. What do you think? Pretty diplomatic. There are kids with disabilities that, are very vulnerable and believe that masks would be the way forward. There are kids with disabilities whose families believe that masks are inappropriate. There are people that believe their kids have disabilities, they must be in school in person. Other people who have kids with disabilities believe they must be at home. So the other piece is that, this whole individualized nature is going to continue on. And I think we have to be really careful about this kind of broad thing that all people in this particular group want this particular thing, because it's kind of continuously changing. And I think we're going to look back on this time and think, how do we think we could actually compensate people and make things whole while we're still in the middle of the battle? Like, we're still in the middle of it. And so I think these conversations will be much more interesting when our positivity rates are under 2%. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it will be a very different conversation around compensatory education or around more intensive educational services. And the other thing we didn't speak about yet, although we did speak about it initially, is staff shortages, although you did speak about it. And so I also think that we're going to see a lot of impact to kids' IEPs this year and kids' educational programs because of the enormous challenges folks are having around staffing. And that, it's all of our issue, right?
We're going to have a lot of hard lessons and reflections to face when this time is over, if it ever ends. So that's an important reminder. And it's unfortunate that in some districts, trying to seek those compensatory measures is the only way some kids are getting help. And it's really sad. So we do need to prioritize that whole child approach and make sure we're trying to do the best we can for these kids individually. As we get ready to close out, and I have dropped the link for the survey, we definitely want to hear from you all so we can make sure we keep having these types of discussions and broaden them based on what you need to know as advocates, parents, caregivers alike. But as we round out here, I ask that each of you share an action item or something that parents, caregivers, and other advocates should think about as we continue through this pandemic. What is one thing you definitely want folks to take away tonight? And I will start with Yuki.
Okay, That is one thing. So I think Leslie said that too. Like if you feel like you need support or help and you don't know where to go, just ask. You ask. And answer might be no, we can't do it, but I think ask. And there are more resources available than you are aware of. And as more people you talk to, they will have resources that can help you. So please speak up. And just know that everybody is going through this together. So, what your concern is not nothing against you. Like everybody is experiencing this. So just don't be ashamed and just ask for help.
Thank you. So under the same pressure, let me call the next person, Dr. Sutton.
My advice to anyone who's listening is really take advantage of opportunities like open house or any events that are happening at school. Really take advantage of attending those events or seeking more information about what's happening in those events, just because that's a great way to learn about what's happening in a school or in a district. Even go to your local board meeting for your school district. That's where a lot of information is shared about upcoming plans and sort of larger scale, either district level plans. But if you want to learn more specifically about a school, if you're a parent, really take advantage of those events. And then ask, like Yuki just suggested, ask questions about what supports are available in that school. What are we doing to address? What is your school doing to address the social emotional learning needs of students? What is your school doing to address students who are below level or significantly below level in reading, in math? What kinds of programs are available before, during, or after school? How are you personalizing learning for students who don't quite have all of the skills necessary to master the standards at grade level? So those are things that can be really helpful. And, and those individuals, should be able to give you a response that will give you enough information to know that your child is getting exactly what he or she needs. And then also ask about those intervention supports. What do you have available? Because they do have them. Every school campus, every school district should have those supports available, because we know that every student's needs are very different, and so we want to make sure that we have those things available to address all needs.
Dr. Lovett.
Okay, well, I'll just simply say ditto to what Dr. Sutton said and Yuki. I think they both really kind of hit on much of what I would say, and that's just simply staying connected, much like what we're doing tonight. Whenever those opportunities present themselves, we have things like parent universities and parent trainings and, opportunities for engagement with parents. I really just encourage any parents who are on the call or caregivers, to take advantage of those things. We want to work with you. We want to partner with you in the school district. We recognize that this pandemic, we can't get through it alone, and not just in the school setting, but in life. It's taking all of us coming together as a collective to move through this and to have some peace of mind as we go through the challenges that we face. So I would just simply say that in addition to all that they've said, let's just stay connected. I would encourage any of you who are Atlanta Public Schools caregivers or parents to please check out our website. We have a little button there that says parents. As soon as you go there, there are parent resources and other opportunities that you can access so that you can see, some ways in which you can get the resources that you need, or other ways to stay engaged or stay connected with the district and with your schools. So that's all I'd say. Let's just stay connected and we can work together through this.
So mine would be a little more on the flavor of advocacy and thinking about what we can do. And so one thing I would tell you is to stand in someone else's shoes. So I've spent a lot of really intense time learning from people with lived experience about anti-racist work and work around white supremacy. I've spent a lot of time learning about LGBTQIA issues, especially in the past year and a half, as I actually have a son who's trans. So that's been something that I've gotten really very good intensive lessons on. And I was not as aware as I should have been for a very long time. And I've actually spent a lot of time listening to voices of other people that have very different lived experiences than I have and things I just don't know about. So you don't know much about negotiation. There's a whole field of negotiation if you're an advocate or a parent and you want to learn about negotiation or communication. You want to learn about communication or personal presentation or about mental health, or another thing I've learned a lot about is about how race impacts the way psychology is presented and how that changes in America. We're reading lots about that, or even about the funding of school systems and what did redlining do? How did we create our school systems this way? How are they funded now? And how could it be funded in the future? Those are just a small group of ideas that you could learn about and read about if this is your interest, that will flip your mind and change how you're thinking about what is advocacy and what does it mean. It's really not solely about helping one kid get a particular educational service that you're interested in. It may start that way, but for many of us, it moves. And so along those lines, the other thing I'd encourage you to do is to really speak truth and to think about our words and what we say and what we do and what we mean. And because I do think there's a healing piece when we think about this trauma, about people really recognizing what we are all experiencing. And I think that really does push forward that relationship piece, I think, are what we're talking about, and the communication piece. And thank y'all.
Well, thank you. And Leslie, I think that's a great note to end on. I'm a big proponent of sort of naming the thing. And I think that that can often get us started down a path of healing and recognition of each other's collective humanity. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to all of our attendees for tuning in for this fantastic panel. And thank you all to our panelists for taking time out of what we know are busy schedules to talk about these important issues with everyone. So we're so grateful for all of you, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Before the panelists jump off, really remarkable. Can we get all of you to turn your cameras on, and I can do a screenshot that in a little bit. Our comms folks at Georgia, I think we've lost a couple of folks already though, haven't we?
Caroline, you want to stop the recording, please?
Yeah.